Today I wanted to go over 3 powerful ways to reinforce the low end of your kick drum in a mix that doesn't just involve covering issues with samples. The reason we don't want to just immediately reach for samples, for one, is because if you have live drums, there's a reason you spent the money and effort miking up the kit. If the performance was great, it's in you and the drummer's best interest to get it all sounding great before covering it up. And secondly, samples often feel like a band-aid to learning proper mixing techniques that allow you to get the best out of each track, and it seems like the norm to just layer 20 samples and hope for the best, specifically in rock and metal. Not that samples are bad at all by any means, even the best performances can always use a little enhancement, but emphasis on enhancement, not replacement. These mixing tricks also apply perfectly with sampled drums though, so don't click away just yet if you're rocking a full MIDI kick drum. First up on the list is the most obvious, but in my opinion, the most flawed method, and that is boosting with EQ. Now on first thought, it may not be entirely obvious why this might be an issue, but I like to think of EQ as a volume knob for frequencies, which means when you have a poor low end, you're just making that weaker low end louder versus improving the characteristics of the sound. In a full mix, this often can do the trick, but it doesn't come without the potential for clouding up your low end with a less focused feeling kick drum sound, because you'll likely be boosting weaker harmonics that didn't cut through on their own. Here's a quick example of this in action, although the less low end in your kick microphone, the more obvious these issues become when you start boosting. So as you can tell, with the boost, the low end does come up and it does sound a lot fatter as a kick drum, but what's happening around it is you're also boosting a lot of these harmonics that kind of didn't really stick out enough, and they're kind of coming up with the area you're boosting. Now obviously you could squeeze in the Q a little bit, but that means you're going to get a little bit more of a ringy kick drum sound in your low end. And as you can see, coming in here pretty tight, I have to go really high for it to even really make much of a difference to the sound. But even there, you still hear a little bit of that ringing, and it kind of clouds up a little bit. So like I said, it works in the context of a mix. Once I unsolo it, you probably don't hear a lot of those things come through as much, but on a bigger sound system, those things are going to start to come through, and it's often why maybe your low end sounds bad in your car, but in your headphones, it sounds pretty good. Those lower frequencies just need bigger systems to start to build up. Next up on the list is one of the most classic methods for enhancing a kick drum, but specifically is a hardware choice you'd need to make prior to recording, and that's the subkick. This is essentially a speaker diaphragm that you place in front of the kick drum, and it acts like a microphone to capture all of the low end energy that your kick drum has when you track drums. This option might be a little out of price range for those of you working at home, being that some of you don't even record your own drums, but this is a super common way that large commercial studios are able to get great low end from their live kick drums without sacrificing mic placement and losing the punchy top end. All it is ran as an extra microphone alongside the others. Here's a quick example of how these microphones sound, and then in the context against the kick so you can see how they work. So here's the sound of the subkick microphone by itself. All it is essentially the low end frequencies of the kick drum, and you don't really get much of the other things. It's definitely one of those want to haves more than a need to have if you're recording drums and don't have a lot of inputs, but this is a really great option to get that extra low end into your kick drum. And then all you have to do is blend that in with the other kick mics, and it kind of works as a low end knob for your kick that is a lot cleaner than an EQ. As you can tell, unmuting that really just brings the low end up immediately in your face, and it's a super clean way. But like I said, it is a little cost prohibitive. If you're not doing live drums specifically, it's kind of out of your options for making any sense to use one. But if you are recording live drums, this is a super great addition to make into your microphone collection, as it does allow you to get a super clean, punchy low end out of your drums. And then now onto the final reinforcement technique, which is using a psychoacoustic processor like Sublift. With these types of plugins, you essentially get the best of both worlds. You're able to boost specific frequency ranges, but rather than boosting what's there, these plugins then listen and then generate harmonics to match and enhance the low end of your kick drum or bass instrument. This means you're boosting clean and punchy low end, which lets you keep your mix feeling focused while still getting all the benefits of something like a subkick, which is feeding low end information based off of the real kick drum and not just using fake synthesis like some other MIDI based generators create. Let me show you this one in action so you can get an idea for how this works. So opening up Sublift, you have a pretty simple interface. You can just choose the frequency range, which for a kick drum, I like to start around 55 Hertz. It's a little bit lower than some of the fundamentals on your bass instrument, and I like to choose the sub mode, whereas lift mode is a little bit more for instruments that hold out notes and have a little bit more sustain to them. Sub is a little bit more based exactly on what it's hearing. And then all you need to do is essentially listen and pull up this intensity knob and try to figure out where the sweet spot is for the low end of your kick drum. So let's listen to this and then dial it in. So somewhere around this 30 to 40 area, I'm going to listen back and just kind of hear an A-B so I can easily hear what's going on. And then without. As you could tell, it really kind of changes the sound of the kick drum in a positive way. It rounds off a little bit of that top end, so it sounds a little bit cleaner as a kick drum, a little bit more punchy. But the low end it's completely transformed it. They're almost night and day, and it really does kind of have that same vibe as the sub kick, where it's got that nice rounded low end that doesn't get in the way of the actual kick punch. And that may be a little bit too much for some of you, so we can pull it back and go like 30%, just so you guys can see a little bit more of a pulled back example. It really just, it feels like you're adding a sample in there, but you can know that this is the full kick drum. And the nice thing about this is you really get the benefit and the sound of a sample, but you don't have to go in and create all these MIDI notes and try to get them phase accurate to where you're going to be able to pull off layering a bunch of samples in a dense mix. And now let's listen to it in context so you can see how it sounds. Keep in mind, this isn't a final mix or anything. This is just, channel strips across some live drums just so you can get an idea. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. If you checked them all out, be sure to let us know which of these three you guys like to use the most in your own mixes. If you'd like to check out more mixing and mastering content, check out this video where Johnny shows off even more ways to use psychoacoustic processors like Sublift to improve the low end of your mixes. Happy mixing and have a good one.